Hello, word enthusiasts, and welcome to Hello Word. I'm your host, Alex, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on another linguistic adventure. Today, we're diving into a fascinating word, a C1 level noun, burden. It means a heavy responsibility. A burden, in its simplest form, is something difficult to bear. It can be a literal weight, but more often, it's used to describe something that weighs heavily on your mind or spirit, a responsibility that feels like a significant weight. Think of it as a heavy backpack you're carrying, filled with obligations and worries. Now, let's explore how we can use burden in everyday language. You might say, the burden of leadership can be overwhelming at times. Or, she carried the burden of her family's expectations. Another way to understand burden is through its synonyms. Let's consider a few. One excellent synonym is onus. The word onus also refers to a duty or responsibility, often a difficult one. For example, the onus is on the government to address the issue of climate change. See how onus highlights the responsibility aspect. Another synonym we can use is liability. A liability is something you're responsible for, often a debt or a disadvantage. Consider this sentence. The company's large debts became a significant liability. So, while burden focuses on the emotional or mental weight, liability emphasizes the responsibility aspect, especially in a financial or legal context. Our third synonym is encumbrance. An encumbrance is something that impedes or hinders. For example, the outdated technology proved to be an encumbrance to the company's progress. While an encumbrance isn't always a responsibility like a burden, it creates difficulty and makes progress harder, similar to how a burden weighs you down. Now, let's turn to antonyms, words that represent the opposite of burden. A great antonym for burden is relief. Relief means a feeling of reassurance and relaxation following release from anxiety or distress. You might say, it was a great relief to finally finish the project. Notice how relief describes the absence of the weight and stress associated with a burden. Another antonym is aid. Aid is help or assistance. It's the opposite of being weighed down. Instead, you are being lifted up. For instance, the international community provided aid to the earthquake victims. Someone offering aid helps alleviate the burden of those in need. Finally, let's consider comfort. Comfort means a state of physical ease and freedom from pain or constraint. This is similar to the opposite of feeling weighed down by worry or responsibility. She found comfort in her friends during the difficult time. So, relief, aid, and comfort all represent freedom from the weight and responsibility associated with the burden. Let's look at ways we use burden in everyday life. You might hear someone say, I don't want to be a burden to my family. This means they don't want to create extra difficulty or responsibility for their family members. We can also use burden in common expressions. For instance, someone might say, I'm carrying the burden of the world on my shoulders. This expression means they feel overwhelmed with responsibility and stress. Here are some more example sentences to help you get a feel for burden. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution. This means it's the prosecution's responsibility to prove the defendant's guilt. He felt a great burden of guilt after the accident. This shows the emotional weight of responsibility. The tax increases placed an additional burden on small businesses. This example highlights the practical difficulty caused by the burden. She shared the burden of caring for her elderly parents with her siblings. This demonstrates how responsibilities can be divided. The heavy burden of tradition weighed on the young artist, limiting her creative expression. This last example shows how even something seemingly positive, like tradition, can become a burden if it's too restrictive. In summary, burden, a C1 level noun, signifies a heavy responsibility, something that weighs heavily on you. We explored its synonyms like onus, liability, and encumbrance, which also suggest responsibility or difficulty. We then contrasted burden with its antonyms, relief, aid, and comfort, which represent freedom from weight and worry. We examined how burden is used in everyday conversations and expressions. Thank you for joining me on this linguistic exploration of the word burden. I hope you found it enlightening and helpful. Now, before we wrap up, I have a small request. If you enjoyed this episode of Hello Word, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your support helps others discover the show and continue their English learning journey. And here's a challenge for you. I encourage you to create your own sentence using the word burden and share it in the comments below. I'm excited to see what creative and insightful sentences you come up with. Until next time, keep exploring the wonderful world of words.